Second to the musings of Donald
Bing,
Trump,
bing, bong.
Today's topic is probably the most discussed topic on the news across the world. You see, every day millions of people throw in their 2 cents about the Chinese Communist Party.
For some reason, they don't have much
And
to say
whether it be
about
discussions
China.
about their trade war with the USA, their management of COVID, its treatment of the Uyghur Muslims, its expansion into the South China Sea, or its supposed plan for world domination, it seems like everyone has something to say about the Chinese government, and that list would certainly include yours truly. Yet what continues to astound me is how little an idea most of us have about how the Chinese government actually works, and it seems like most of us just assume that they're a similar system to Western governments like Britain and America. The reality is that actually couldn't be further from the truth, and in today's episode we're going to look at the style of government that was set up with China's constitution in 1950 and then formally adopted in 1954. In this fourth episode of the history of modern China, we see that the blueprint left behind by Mao Zedong has basically become the same structure that the CCP still holds to today. And so I guess we really do need to ask the question, well, how does the Chinese government actually work?
Hello there.
Okay, so if you saw episode 3, and if you haven't, make sure to by clicking here, we saw Mao begin his purge of all Chinese who had ties to Chiang Kai-shek's KMT in Taiwan. And so basically, as Mao's henchmen were writing up the constitution, the first rule that they set up was that anyone who wanted to be in the government had to be a member of the Chinese Communist Party. Basically, this made China a one-party state. Now, it's important to remember that China was on the back of a civil war that spanned 3 decades. So there was an extremely high need for unity, but it meant unity at the expense of any dissenting opinion. And so with only CCP members being eligible for government, the constitution outlined the limited democratic rights that Chinese citizens had. You see, Chinese citizens could elect CCP members to represent them at the different levels of Congress. There was a local Congress for the suburbs, a county Congress to represent cities and towns, and then provincial governments to represent the provinces, basically the Chinese equivalent of states. And then there was a national Congress to represent the people of China on a national level. Now, these congressional seats are also held for 5 years. Now, a really important point. In a country like the USA, Congress actually makes the law. However, in China's, yes, their Congress passes laws, but they actually have no involvement in implementing these laws and governing China. And so instead, the Chinese Congresses have 2 main jobs. The first main job that they have is to inform the CCP about what ordinary people believe about certain policies. So basically, their first job is to act as glorified pollsters. Secondly, the National Congress has the job of electing the State Council. And so basically, China elects the people who then elect the people to actually govern and implement these laws. So for example, if China wanted to change its tax brackets, the National Congress might pass a law that changes the top tax rate from 45% to 55%. And so this would be the job of the National Congress that was elected by the people. However, the State Council is the body that would actually be responsible for ensuring that all high income earners in that top tax bracket actually pay the new increased tax rate. And so the State Council could implement new laws and new codes to ensure that these high income earners actually pay the new amount of tax required. So we now move on from our Congresses that don't hold much power to the State Council that actually does. And so like we said, the State Council is important because it actually implements the National Congress's laws. But it's also quite important because the State Council appoints 25 people to be a part of its Politburo. Now the Politburo is the inner circle of the Chinese government. And if you were a Chinese person who wanted the most amount of power, the Politburo is where you'd want to end up. And so the Politburo is responsible for choosing which people go where. Now let's go back to our tax example. If China wanted to ensure that its highest income earners paid 55% rather than 45% in tax, that would be a massive job for the State Council to ensure by itself. Like, how is an organization that meets in Beijing supposed to keep track of what people are doing out here in Shanghai? Well, the State Council doesn't do it alone. And so underneath China's state councils, there are also provincial councils to deal with more local issues. Now the Politburo is really important because they decide who goes where. And so for example, the leader of Qinghai, and we call the leader the General Secretary, well, they might be old and close to retirement, and so the Politburo might have noticed that the leader of this small province called Hainan has been doing an excellent job in making sure its high income earners are paying their tax. So the Politburo might decide to give this leader a promotion, and so then this leader will go from leading Hainan up to leading Qinghai and replacing the retiring leader there. And so this is one of the ways in which China is so different to the West. In most Western systems, people who start in state or county politics stay there. For example, the Premier of my state, New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian, will likely never enter federal politics and will never become the Prime Minister of Australia. And that's because power is split between the states and the federal government in the West. In some matters, the federal government cannot tell the state government what to do. However, in China, the provinces are all under the control of the federal government, and the provinces always have to do what China tells them to do. And so people will work their way up from the small provinces, up all the way to the big provinces, and then if they really stand out, they might enter the Politburo. And so to finish, I'll walk you through with an example. Xi Jinping is the current leader of China and is the most powerful man in the country. Now, he started off as the deputy to a general secretary in a county. He was then promoted to the leader of that county, then he was promoted to the leader of the province, Hebei. After that, he was promoted to a bigger province, Fujian, and then to a bigger one in Zedong, and then after that, he was promoted to one of the biggest provinces in China, Shanghai. Now, in 2007, when he was the leader of Shanghai, the State Council appointed him onto the Politburo, and between 2007 and 2013, the Politburo gave him increased responsibilities. And so in late 2012, the Politburo gave Xi the responsibility of being the chairman of the military. And as the head of the military, this made him the most powerful person in the Politburo. So, as the most powerful person in the most powerful group of China, Xi Jinping is recognized as the leader of China and is the general secretary of the Communist Party. It's also important to note that the National Congress has the power to appoint a president. Now, the president basically does nothing important and is kind of like a monarch figure in Britain, but the National Congress usually gives the title to the General Secretary as a way of saying, we recognize you as our leader. So Xi Jinping holds onto the title of both the General Secretary of the Communist Party and the President of the Democratic part of the Chinese government. And so in 2018, things got pretty interesting as Xi Jinping really started to mess with this system. But you're just going to have to wait till a later episode to find out the details. Thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe so that this channel can grow. The more growth that we have means the more resources that we have to make better videos with higher production value. So please hit subscribe. It is free to do. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time for our new venture into a fascinating part of history.